In this video, I'm going to explain the systems I have used after lots of trial and error to own over 20 franchise locations, semi-absentee. If you explore franchise ownership by researching several brands, you will most likely hear the term semi-absentee ownership. It's also called manager-led, flexible ownership, executive ownership, side hustle. This type of franchise ownership is both appealing and controversial. Of course it's appealing, because who wouldn't want to keep the W-2 income from their job, own a cash-flowing business on the side managed by someone else, where you as the owner only need to put in part-time hours each week, right? It's controversial because not all semi-absentee opportunities are created equal. Some brands are more suitable as a semi-absentee because they have more resources and require fewer skills from the day-to-day leader. But the reality of semi-absentee ownership is most franchisors who use this term for franchise ownership are doing it incorrectly. The franchise business is not what determines whether or not it can be operated semi-absentee. In my experience, it is always the person running the business that makes the difference. First, let me give you my resume, and then I'll tell you about the system. I've been a franchisee for nearly 20 years and have owned over 20 locations across 4 brands. I've owned Anytime Fitness, Complete Nutritions, Orange Theories, and Soccer Stars. To my knowledge, none of the brands I've owned marketed themselves as semi-absentee, yet I've run all of them this way using this system. My very first franchise was Anytime Fitness, and my plan was to run it as an owner-operator. I left a job that I loved and bought the rights to 3 locations. My first location was in Fremont, Nebraska. The first 2 months are still my most cherished memories as an entrepreneur. I had just left my job in nutrition and was running the pre-sale for Anytime Fitness out of a freezing cold, worn-out construction trailer in the middle of winter, but I didn't care. I was now an entrepreneur and I absolutely loved it. Then I got a call that changed everything. The boss of the job I left called me and asked me to come back. I told him my heart was set on being a business owner and I couldn't come back. He then told me he wanted me to come back as his business partner, and after some negotiation, I accepted. This forced me into a situation where Anytime Fitness now needed to be managed semi-absentee. I racked my brain on who would be the right fit and landed on a former coworker of mine. I called him up and asked if I could travel out to see him. After spending some time discussing it, he left his job and relocated to Fremont to run this location and my future Anytime Fitness locations as a profit-sharing manager. Once we had the right systems in place, I spent about an hour a month in the business going over the financials and a few other things with the manager and our CPA. Now, I want to be clear. I wasn't always able to manage my franchise businesses with just a few hours. There were times in the business where I had to put in more time, specifically when we planned to open another location. During these times, I would step in for site selection, construction management, and the other jobs required to open a new location. These tasks would take much more than just a few hours, but once the business was up and running, nearly 100% of the day-to-day was run by the manager. We eventually grew into 4 profitable locations, and I was loving life. About 3 years in, I sold 2 of the locations to the governor of Nebraska, of all people, and they required that my manager go with them as part of the sale. I agreed, thinking that I would just train one of my other employees and make them a profit-sharing manager. But my nutrition business was going very well, and I never took the time to figure out who was the right fit as that profit-sharing manager for the remaining 2 Anytime Fitnesses. Instead, I just had 2 less capable employees running their individual locations without the systems in place that I knew worked. And I bet you can guess what happened. Membership went down, sales went down, and of course, profits plummeted. Ultimately, I sold these 2 locations for a fraction of what they were worth at their peak. My mistake was I didn't properly set up a leader using the system that I knew worked. After selling my last 2 Anytime Fitnesses, I knew I would continue to invest in franchise locations, but I committed to myself that I would never make the same mistake of running another franchise without putting this system in place. Today, I own 5 franchise locations and I spend about 3 hours per quarter on them. First, it starts with your manager or partner. I've managed franchises with both managers and partners, but I am a much bigger fan of owning it with a partner. You may have heard me say this before, but nearly every time I meet someone and talk about what I do, they ask, what's the hot new franchise? And I always say, that's the wrong question to ask. See, the people that I'm meeting, they're at a stage in their life where they are not going to run the day-to-day operations of a franchise. I tell them that there's no lack of a hot new franchise. We have dozens of them at any time that we're working with. The real question is, who do you know that can manage the franchise for you? So how do you find the right person to run your franchise? I've only recruited people that I've previously worked with. My opinion is I need to know what it is like working with this person over a long period of time to be sure our partnership is going to work. I have a pretty strong network, and I often get asked my secret to keeping my network strong. Well, it is because I keep a list of what I call STIC, stick people, that I know and I stay in contact with. Both of the people I co-founded my last 2 companies with were people that I once worked with, but hadn't worked with in over 5 years. I knew they were people I could trust and people that were capable, so we stayed in touch until the time was right to work together. So start by thinking back to all the people you've worked with and make a short list that have these STIC characteristics. S, someone who has the skills. T, someone you trust. I, someone you can properly incentivize. And C, someone who has capacity. Well, this may not resonate with everyone. I think of them as STIC people. It just helps me remember the acronym. Skills and trust are typically something that you can assess before reaching out to any of these people. Whether you can incent them properly and if they have the capacity is usually figured out after you tell them about the opportunity. Usually someone will create capacity if the incentive is right, but I see potential business owners fail at this all the time because they don't offer the proper incentives to the person they hope to be the manager. It reminds me of this saying, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. What does that mean? It means don't be greedy. I understand you're taking the financial risk and you want to create as much upside for yourself as possible. But guess what? The person you're recruiting wants the same. If the franchise is up and running and your STIC manager is managing 90% of the work while you continue to earn your W-2 income, then don't get greedy and mess it all up. I like to create my compensation plans with a competitive base pay, attractive benefits, a small monthly commission to keep the person motivated, with the larger upside compensation coming from profit sharing at the end of the year. For a STIC manager, it might look something like this: $60,000 base pay, 3 to 5% of sales, 5% profit sharing, medical, dental, vision, 401k, and time off. I used this system on a franchise I had that was doing around $800,000 in sales with 20% profits. My STIC manager made roughly $108,000, and it went up when we grew into our second location. This left me 95% of the profits after his bonus, or $152,000. I thought this was a great scenario for both of us, but over time, that might not be enough to retain a great manager. Eventually, they will realize they are doing the majority of the work while you are making more money. That is why I also like to include a long-term incentive. This helps your manager to feel like an actual owner with the ability to participate in the sale of the business. Or if the business doesn't sell, after 10 years or so, you vest them. This works by hiring a CPA to give you a formal valuation, and you begin paying out the manager their vested percentage over the next few years. If you found a manager with STIC characteristics that runs a profitable franchise for you over 10 plus years, then this is a bargain for you. Plus, treat this person well, and maybe they'll be willing to stay with you and do it again and again. My preference, however, is to avoid the complication of the vesting and payout altogether and just find someone who has real equity in the business. I have learned the hard way on this, and now I have a few rules in order for someone to get equity. Number 1, I have the majority ownership. I have seen really messy business breakups because the partners were 50-50. At the end of the day, someone needs to be able to make the call. Number 2, my partners have to put in their own money equal to their ownership percentage. I have found the greatest motivator is for them to have their own money on the line. Without money in, there is no ownership. For one of the franchise brands I own, I knew my partner was the perfect person to own the business with. He didn't have the cash readily available and was reluctant to put any in. I almost broke my rule, but then remembered the trouble that I had gotten into when I didn't require others to put in cash. Ultimately, I said he had to have real money, and he decided to use his 401k. Today, it's a franchise business that's worth over $2 million, and he will tell you it was the best decision he could have made. Now, let's talk about the day-to-day management structure. Here are the 5 strategies we use to help with our communication and to ensure the business is running smoothly. Number 1, a daily huddle. I am a huge believer in the daily huddle. I believe it creates collaboration and accountability. While I don't participate in the daily huddles for my franchise businesses, I ask my managers to create a daily huddle every morning with a performance tracker that is completed during the huddle, where everyone can see the production of everyone else from the previous day. Of course, it's not only about accountability. In these meetings, there is best practice sharing, discussions on how to overcome obstacles, relationship grow, and many other benefits. But the two key components are to do it every weekday and to have a performance tracker. Zoom has made this easier than ever before. People no longer have to be in person. Just log into Zoom and 20 minutes each morning, you're done. It's that easy. Number 2, at the end of the day, have a report that is emailed to everyone. Many franchisors will have a dashboard in place that will do this for you. I love the end of days where I get the reports that show me things like new signups, total sales, missed opportunities, etc. Number 3, a customer and employee pulse. I like using Net Promoter Score for the customer pulse and 15.5 for the employee pulse. I remember back when I was a franchisor how our business was completely changed when we implemented NPS. We could regularly see how our customers scored our services with reports around which parts of the businesses they loved and which parts they didn't. For the staff, we use 15.5. This takes about 5 minutes per week for each employee to complete and gives us a pulse on how they are feeling overall about their work and some key follow-up questions. Number 4, I ask my partners to complete a report once a month before our breakfast meeting. This report includes what's going well, what could go better, what was last month's goal, did we accomplish it, why or why not, what is your goal for the next month, and what could stand in the way. Last, number 5, once a month or once a quarter, breakfast meetings with the manager. When the business is in the first year, or if it isn't performing as we want it to, we meet monthly. Once the business starts to thrive, we move this to quarterly. During this meeting, we go over financials, Net Promoter Score, the 15.5 reports, and we talk about growth opportunities. There it is. That's my system after 20 years, 20 plus franchise locations, and several partnerships. This is the system that works for me. So the next time you consider a semi-absentee franchise, I would encourage you to ignore the franchisor's claims and instead evaluate if you are in a position to find a STIC manager and put these 5 communication strategies in place. You are the one that will determine if the franchise can be run semi-absentee or not. It's not the franchisor's responsibility. I plan to continue to open more franchise locations. My bottleneck isn't great franchise brands available or capital or time to do it. My bottleneck has always been and will continue to be finding STIC managers. This is why I would encourage you to stay in contact with the STIC people you know well.